Hackney sort of fancies itself as a sort of long-standing home for dissenters, and so we're talking about people who raise their voices against proposals that affect its built heritage. Well, you know, where better in Hackney than Stoke Newington to sort of learn more about that and kind of how, not just in the past but in the present and, you know, inevitably in the future, people need to keep on raising their voices to ensure that the buildings and spaces that we love are, you know, maintained and enhanced rather than lost or damaged. And how have people done this? Through letters, through petitions, through meetings, and more. We'll hear about, you know, the various ways as we go. I'm speaking to you as a trustee of the Hackney Society. What is the Hackney Society? It's a civic and amenity society founded in 1967, and to quote from the website, it's founded to involve and support people in the conservation and regeneration of Hackney's built environment and public spaces. So we campaign. There's a great section on our website about all the campaigns the Society's done over the years. We have various subgroups, do events, not just this one, but programme events all through the year, publish books and other materials, and generally advocate for the past, present and the future of the built environment of Hackney Borough. I am the chair of its Buildings at Risk group, which started in late 2024 following the publication of last year's Heritage at Risk Register by Historic England. Hackney Borough has 33 heritage assets entered as being at risk. 31 of those are nationally listed buildings and structures, so walls and railings, and 2 are conservation areas. The group, as it currently operates, exists as more as a forum than anything else for learning and sharing information about Hackney's at-risk built heritage. And one of the reasons I'm particularly keen on doing so is because people often think the worst when faced with a lack of information. So if we can kind of collate that information and just make it more available in a public forum, then, you know, people will be better informed and think more positively, as well as be able to kind of feel more engaged, and so can act and have the knowledge of the channels by which to do that. We're looking to do more in the future. This is kind of the first time we've taken the Buildings at Risk group out on the road, so I'm not saying we're going to have a whole suite of these things where we go around different parts of the borough, but it's certainly something that, yeah, been kind of keen to just broaden the reach of the group a little bit, and just in a way sort of reflect on what we've achieved in the first few months of its existence, what we've sort of found out, and so what we can share with people. I'm going to introduce you to a few of my friends. They're not most interesting friends, but if you're on a tour like this, I think you guys might get along. So just a few terms that I'll be using throughout the course of the tour. I've already mentioned it, the Heritage at Risk Register. It's a report published annually by, since 1998, initially by English Heritage, and now Historic England. Actually, that goes back a few years in London to the Register of Buildings at Risk, which is limited to listed buildings, which was first published in 1991. Listed buildings, another of my friends, and I quote from the Historic England website, these are buildings of special architectural historic interest with legal protection. They have to be approved by the Secretary of State, and then they're entered on the National Heritage List for England, which is publicly available on the Historic England website for all to look at. Listing buildings began in the 1940s with the Town and Country Planning Acts of 1944 and 47, and is currently done under the terms of Part 1 of the Planning, open bracket, listed buildings with conservation areas, close bracket, Act of 1990. It's riveting reading. I have been looking into it a little bit for you, so, well, you don't have to. Just a little side note on that, we're going to look at we'll see a lot of old buildings, 18th, 19th, 20th century. Buildings under 30 years old are not usually considered for listing, although we will touch at one point about kind of where the sweet spot between what is heritage and what is kind of contemporary comes in. Linked to listed buildings are registered parks and gardens. In 1984, a register of parks and gardens of special historic interest in England was established. Now includes over 1,700 designed landscapes assessed to be of particular significance. It's now folded into the National Heritage List for England. You pass through 2 of these today, of which Clissold Park is one, so you've already ticked one off the list. Separate to these, what we call designated heritage assets, so nationally recognised buildings, parks and so forth, we have locally listed heritage assets. These are designated by at borough level, or local planning authority level, so in this case Hackney Borough, who's define them as buildings and structures which are of heritage significance and contribute to the local character and distinctiveness of Hackney. They began locally listing in 1991. The current local list, again to be found online, this time on the Hackney Borough website. It's adopted in 2012, still being added to, so it's a live document, and also unfortunately things get lost more easily from a local list because they don't have the same level of protection. There's no legal status, legal protection the same way, and because also they're not deemed national significance, so other factors come in with development proposals come forth, but they're still given a measure of esteem in the planning process and some due consideration. So we will see quite a few local heritage assets, locally listed heritage assets along the way. And the Buildings at Risk group takes an equal interest in locally listed assets because they are deemed of local significance and we are operating at that local level. My final friend is the conservation area, an area of special architectural historic interest which deserves careful management to protect that character. And again, like local listed assets, is designated by a local planning authority. These are, however, statutorily protected, so protected by national law, like listed buildings, because that was first given to them under the Civic Amenities Act of 1967 and latterly in Part 2 of our friend the 1990 Planning Act for listed buildings and conservation areas. We're within Clissold Park Conservation Area, which was designated by Hackney first of all in 1969. It's extended in 2004 as a public consultation as part of that, which attracted 24 responses from national bodies like English Heritage, also local groups like the Clissold Court Residents Association and the Clissold Park Youth Group, as well as just private citizens. 19 of 24 responses supported the inclusion of Greenwood Close in Clissold Court on the north side of the park, so behind the mansion, out of sight unfortunately, within the conservation area, and this duly led to it being included, which shows how, and this is going to be a recurrent feature of the next hour or so, shows how participation in the planning process can happen and can yield results that are very much in tune with what local people want. And I've already caught myself doing this several times. You hear me using the term heritage asset, which I hope is kind of self-explanatory. It's, one thing, it's old, but it's also a positive, it's an asset. So that's kind of planning parlance. I used to work in a planning department for several years, so it's kind of trips off my tongue very easily. But yeah, if you hear me saying that, it's a catch-all term, but yeah, hopefully in the particular context it will make sense to you. Right. We're going to be here for a little bit more. Just need a few housekeeping things and we'll talk about Clissold Park and the mansion. So just in case I wasn't talking loud enough, if I talk too essentially it belongs initially to the 18th century when Jonathan Hoare leased land adjacent to St Mary's Old Church from the Ecclesiastical Commissioners and started to lay out what was then called Stoke Newington Park. The land was still fields and meadows, plus a section of the New River, which we will see imminently, which was completed in 1613 to bring water in from Hertfordshire to the centre of London. In 1811, the perpetual lease on this property was obtained by a Mr. William Crawshay, who was a member of a family who said to have owned so many mines, slate quarries and other industrial properties that they're the richest commoners in England. Mr. Crawshay's yearly rental wasn't like this, £109 and a fat turkey. In return, this is the important bit, this lease prevented him from cutting down trees or granting building leases. Remember the building leases bit. Now, a little bit of veil in the piece here, so far as he prevented his daughter, Eliza Crawshay, from marrying the curate of the parish church, Reverend Augustus Clissold. But then he died in 1834, and so she had the last laugh because she married Augustus the following year. She inherited the perpetual lease, and so they lived happily until first she died, so then Augustus took it on. And then in 1882, Reverend Clissold passed away, but not before. It was very 19th century. His name was the name that was attached to house and grounds alike. Crawshay was all but forgotten, and upon that, the estate reverted back to her family. They had no issue, so it reverted in the end to George Crawshay, their nephew. The Crawshay family were based out in Wales, and like I said, had interest in mines and quarries and so forth. Not many of them in London, so not much reason for them to come to London. So nonetheless, George Crawshay paid some heed to Clissold Park insofar as he allowed public access to the grounds on a limited number of days in the early 1880s, but was very clear at that point that it was no longer than for the duration of his lifetime. The people of Stoke Newington really enjoyed this, and they flocked in, and with that came some sort of crowd control issues, and so Joseph Beck, a local politician and at the time a leading light in the world of optics, shelled out for the policing costs until the Home Secretary, no less, learnt about this, and it was decreed that it was a public expense, and so Beck was to be reimbursed. Now, I'll meet Beck again in a second. Back to George Crawshay. In 1884 and again in 1886 he attempted to divest himself of the estate, and in 1886 he managed to do so, selling it to the ecclesiastical commissioners, I hope that's the last time I say that, in return for £65,000. The commissioners, no longer bound by that preclusion of laying out house plots and building houses upon the land, quickly moved to propose felling of trees and laying out of plots to facilitate development. People of Stoke Newington are not best pleased about this, least of all Joseph Beck, and following 3 public petitions, a lot of energetic campaigning, the land was finally purchased by the Metropolitan Board of Works under the Clissold Park Stoke Newington Act of 1887, financial aid coming from various bodies, altogether costing £96,000, now probably approaching something equivalent to £5 million, and you might have noticed a considerable markup from what the commissioners paid for the same land just the year before. Now, this successful outcome was powered and delivered by the Clissold Park Preservation Committee, and at this point I just need to give a huge shout out to Amir Dotan, who must be known to a few of you. He's Mr. Stoke Newington history. He does so much brilliant work as well on the history of all aspects of Stoke Newington, but particularly he's done some great extensive work on the Preservation Committee and its campaign, and Joseph Beck, who kicked it all off, founded the Clissold Park Preservation Committee by holding, and I quote, an influential meeting attended by about 40 principal inhabitants at his house in mid-1886. This was preparatory to a public meeting in the St Mary's Church Rooms on Defoe Road on the 30th of June. Beck lived on Albion Road and is commemorated in a Hackney Borough Heritage Plaque affixed to the Barton House Health Centre, which stands on the site of Beck's house, which unveiled in 2018, and no surprise, it was Amir who was instrumental in commemorating him in this way. The co-leader of the Preservation Committee was a gentleman named John Runce, who held key positions in financial institutions and so took care of the fundraising side of things, and Runce later became Stoke Newington's first mayor. Astonishingly, one of the Preservation Committee's petitions in 1886 attracted 11,000 signatures, and equally astonishingly, Amir managed to crowdsource a transcription of all 400 pages of the manuscript in a mere 15 days in 2021. I mean, the date, as you might deduce, is around about one of the lockdown times, so I think everyone's got a little bit more time on their hands in those days, but nonetheless a brilliant kind of civic-minded endeavour that achieved a great result in a flabbergastingly short amount of time. Amir's also photographed the contents of the Beck archive, which is extensive, and published the images online, so we have a full view of Beck's side of the campaign from 1884 all the way through to 1890, and a slap-up celebratory meal to congratulate everyone for a good job well done. There was fierce opposition actually to the plan to turn this into a public park, mainly in Islington and Hackney, from people who thought the money could be better spent. The park was a swamp, not worth buying. Also from wealthy homeowners with eyes firmly fixed on implications regarding house prices. Ça change. So following the purchase, had some features added to the park, which opened on the 24th of July 1889 by the London County Council as a public park, then known as Clissold Park. There were some attempts, slightly last ditch, made to call it Royal Albert Park. It's been Grade 2 listed since 1987. It's been on the Heritage Risk Register, or was on the Heritage Risk Register for over 20 years, being on the very first London register, London registers on the register, and that lasted through till 2012, because in 2011 Hackney Borough Council was awarded £8.9 million of Heritage Lottery Fund and Big Lottery Fund money to pay for a restoration project that did not own the house, but key park features including the lakes and the new river, plus the central drinking fountain, which was originally paid for by public subscription to commemorate Beck and Runts for all they did as part of the preservation campaign, and sort of token of public thanks for that. So we're going to shuffle on now a bit to talk about the house. This is a country villa originally, designed reputedly by Joseph Woods for his uncle Jonathan Hoare, and completed by 1793. I say reputedly because when it was sort of, I think, 1793, Joseph was 17 at the time, so you know, believing the young and their skills, but I think that's probably a little too prodigious to be credible. It's an unusual design because, as you can spot here, it's sort of the ground sweeps up. It's 2 floors, whereas all other side it's 3 stories. This is an entirely natural creation. It's very much part of the vogue of the 18th century for designed landscapes and kind of making things more impressive than nature had kind of originally given the tools to work with. Another feature of the park that is artificial is the ponds, and it was from the lakes that the clay was extracted to make the bricks that were used, certainly inside the house. Apparently the external bricks are from somewhere else. It's known with various names, initially as Paradise House, which is very nice, Crawshay's Farm for obvious reasons, and also the park. And on the north side of the house, there's a memorial fountain put up by Rose Crawshay in 1893. Now, the Crawshay family, like I said, didn't have a lot of interest in Clissold, but nonetheless, they had some kind of ongoing connection, and that was put up by Rose in memory of 3 of her sisters who died in childhood, which is rather sweet. So it's by the toilet entrances if you want to see it today. In the 1880s, the Clissold Park Preservation Campaign suggested various uses that the house could be put forward to once it was taken out of private ownership, including a museum or a public library. That didn't happen. In fact, the main use was as a refreshment room, and its Grade 2 listing, the name it appears under is as the refreshment rooms. So it's the current absence of any cafe, which is due to return later in this year apparently, is something of a sort of historical blip in the long term. The 2011 lottery funded project involved the restoration to the original 18th century layout and conservation work to its heritage features to facilitate use for weddings, classes and other events. In 2017, Caroline Miller, the outgoing chair of the Clissold Park Users Group, revealed that the house was operating a loss of £100,000 a year, and there was a chance Hackney Council would need to allow more private events in the park to generate the money necessary to avoid it closing. And she gave a time frame of 2 years. Classic story of finding the money in a time of local authority austerity, which won't be the first time we'll talk about that. But evidently Hackney came through, or at least people getting married and holding events came through, and certainly in 2019 it was a finalist in the Best Wedding Venue category at the Higher Space Awards, which you know is pretty big in the events industry. And you can now hire rooms, or all of it, for weddings, meetings and parties. Okay, we are now going to an early to mid-19th century terrace. You're also standing on the site of Stoke Newington's village pond, which is of interest. This is Grade 2 listed in 1975. A lot of listings happened in 1975. Kind of just was almost drive by this, like, oh, that looks good, yeah. quick description, that will do. These are owned by Hackney Borough Council, and they're managed by Housing Association, currently Peabody Trust. Now, let me bring out my first prop. This brilliant book by the Hackney Society, Buildings at Risk in Hackney, published in 1987, and very much a kind of snapshot of how things were in less good times, shall we say. A lot of Hackney's buildings, Hackney wasn't necessarily had so much the same influx of wealth that it's had in the 21st century, and so many of its listed or historic buildings were kind of facing hard times. And the Hackney Society did a photographic survey in 1980, and then followed it up with surveys of the actual standing buildings, their status, and by 1987 they were able to kind of revisit that and discover that a number of them have been demolished, a number of kind of very derelict states, and so we have real great snapshot of how things were some almost 40 years ago. And so the book tells us that the Crescent was then threatened by poor quality local authority, scare quotes, renovation. Whatever work they did clearly had the effect of keeping the buildings standing and occupied, but not to their last without any further issues, because at the end of 2023, Peabody submitted applications to Hackney Borough Council for planning consent for repair works and alterations to 107 to 223 Stoke Newington Church Street, Crescent, including replacement roof slates, mansard slates, gutter detains, hoppers, replacement of timber windows, installation of secondary glazing. And let's want to talk about the windows, and indulge me a little here because it speaks to a bigger point, which we'll get to very shortly. A pilot exercise on restoring the windows as they were was carried out in 2023 in conjunction with a Hackney Council Conservation Officer, and this involved timber and resin repairs. These met with their approval, but subsequent performance feedback from residents, I quote, has not been positive, with residents complaining that windows are tightly still fitting poorly, difficult to operate, and not proving fully wind or weather tight. Now, when the application is submitted, part one of the documents is called a design and access statement, and that outlines the installation of secondary glazing. So, should glazing happen within the window frame itself, not touching the window aperture, not touching the wooden frame, it still gives you the effect of double glazing. This would be considered as long as it does not affect architectural features and matches the existing sight lines. And so the proposal was for secondary glazing to all windows with the exception of glazed doors, bay windows featuring heritage shutters that would obstruct installation, and common part windows that do not form part of a residential dwelling, which is a significant minority of the windows, all told, especially at the rear of the property. And tellingly, in February of 2024, the residents launched an online petition because, and again quoting, all 31 flats within the building suffer from flooding, water ingress, dampness, mold growth, rotten windows and inadequate repairs. Their key demand was the installation of double glazed windows, which Peabody supported, but the Conservation Officer at Hackney Borough did not support because they stipulated single glazing with secondary glazing to support that where possible. I don't know if their petitions had any impact. The work's underway, it seems to be focused on the roof. But the thing I tease from this is we have a case of people trying to undermine the whole premise of this so soon, but this is people raising their voices against the built heritage of the borough in a very limited and very specific way. And as their petition puts it, this is not just about preserving historical structure, it's about ensuring decent living conditions for all residents within, and really encapsulates the tension between individual benefit and public benefit that the planning system has to kind of balance. And also something that, you know, climate change will mean becomes more and more common in the future. And, you know, we hear a lot about retaining buildings. That's the most green thing you can do in development terms. Indeed it is, but you know, it's kind of the finer details and whether sort of it's preservation at all costs is something that can really be sustained in a planning policy context. I think it will be interesting to see what happens in the near future. Right, our listed parish church by George Gilbert Scott, completed in 1858. If George Gilbert Scott's name rings a bell, it's because he was a huge successful architect responsible for the likes of St Pancras Station and the Albert Memorial. The spire, however, and someone was saying they can see it from their flat in the Barbican, was not completed until 1890 by his son, John Aldridge Scott. In the Second World War, parts of the church were damaged. That included the roof, and restoration work was conducted by Nugent Francis Cashemile Day. Brilliant name. Church architect did a lot in Hackney, including the rebuilt St Paul's West Hackney Church, which is on Stoke Newington High Street. This church reopened following restoration work in 1957. Fast forward to the present day, I'm a volunteer with the Hackney Food Bank, and every Thursday daytime it has a food parcel distribution session inside the church. Busiest session in Hackney, always needing volunteers, by the by. Speaking to a fellow volunteer the other day, and she said it rained quite heavily and the rain just was shipping through the roof. The roof is failing, causing damp on the walls as well. The heating system on top of everything needs replacing. The congregation is looking at millions of pounds potentially costs to get everything set right. So it's not on the Heritage at Risk Register at the moment, but it's kind of tending towards that, although I'm sure plans are very much in place to try and fight off the decay, to raise the money to pay for things. But often churches, when they are successful in raising the grant money to pay for the costs of renovation works, they do so because they work in partnership with other organisations, with cafes, with community groups, all sorts. One of the things that worries me about New St Mary's Church is that it's so cold inside in the winter. It's bitterly cold. It has its own microclimate. It's so big that inside it's always like several degrees cold. It's nice in the summer, but let me tell you, kind of from October through March, it's punishing. So obviously that is slightly dissuades from groups gravitating towards using it. So yeah, I don't want to kind of be spreading any scurrilous rumours. I'm a natural born optimist, so hopefully things will come good. But it's certainly something that I think all heritage bodies are aware of, and the PCC are most definitely aware of. So fingers crossed, the terrible thing doesn't end up happening. But I think we just have to be mindful. And so if people are particularly involved with the church or with groups who do use the facilities or could use the facilities, then this is kind of, again, one of the things I want to sort of really bring forth today is just, kind of these things can only happen through the involvement, engagement and action of people. And so if that can happen with St Mary's Church, then all the better for it. Okay, welcome to Old St Mary's, which is the predecessor of New St Mary's. This is an almost total reworking of a late medieval church paid for by Lord of the Manor, William Patton, in 1563, which is the date we see above the door there. And to him we owe quite a lot of the church. It was extended in the 18th century, and in 1770, for instance, it was said to have been repaired and beautified. Yet by 1791 it was thought to be too small and its replacement was considered, but ultimately not acted upon. Fast forward to 1827 and a survey revealed a rotten roof and bad drainage with coffins floating under the floor. It's an absolutely grisly sight to behold when they took the floorboards up. Fortunately, the church authorities acted very quickly and it was sympathetically restored by Charles Barry, Palace of Westminster fame, but also Homerton educated. And many of Barry's fittings survive still inside the church. Nonetheless, 19th century population increases of Stoke Newington carried on and the church became insufficiently small, so the new church was built across the street and opened in 1858. Nonetheless, the congregations, they loved this old church, and up to 300 continued to attend what services there were inside this church, and they tried to deliberately cut back the number of services that were offered. They did so partly on suspicion of the rector wished to demolish the church or else convert it into a school and schoolrooms. And this strength of feeling led the Bishop of London, in the end, to promise that the old church could be retained as a chapel of ease, sharing the vicar with the new church, which it did so. So the church survives intact. You can compare that with St Augustine's Tower down in Hackney Central, where the rest of the church was demolished as part of the new church being built, or somewhere like Hornsey, where again just the tower survives. So very fortunate to have the bums on the seats to make the point that this church was worth retaining.
And didn't have a microphone.
No, I mean, I've not been in so long. It might be the equal opposite. This was added to the Heritage at Risk Register in 2014 because much of the external fabric needs repairs, including the tower, cracked renders and open joints to copings. Also, the churchyard is heavily overgrown, with the monument suffering accordingly. Still owned by the parochial church council, although they let a separate organisation operate the building as an arts venue. You might have been to events here. It's still not pulling enough money to cover more than urgent repairs to the building, let alone any kind of more strategic restoration work. Just going to shuffle along now. One to Letitia Barbold, the romantic poet. It's kind of very much like squirreled away behind. It's not a lot to look at, but it was listed for her artistic accomplishments. And also James Stephen, whose monument you see, the nice white limestone one before you. He was an anti-slavery campaigner and a lawyer who worked with the likes of Wilberforce. These were listed in 2008 and 2007 respectively. The condition of the churchyard has caused particular concern for members of the London and Middlesex Archaeological Society's Historic Buildings Conservation Committee. That committee has for several decades sought to ensure a sustainable future for vital aspects of Greater London's built heritage. I think a couple of the members live locally and so have been particularly upset by the overgrown condition of the churchyard. They raised the matter with anyone they think may be relevant. Also, there was a Hackney Citizen newspaper article in January 2025 covering their concerns. Management is actually vested in Hackney Borough Council's Parks and Gardens Department. And so they've contacted or got a response certainly from Mayor Caroline Woodley only last week, in which she indicates that a faculty, so a kind of church planning consent, we won't go into drill down into that, is currently being obtained for works on a wall that's crumbling on the other side, and also for grave clearance work. And in one case repair, which I'm hoping is to that monument behind us there, which has got a really cracked top. There's a really sort of opinion this is probably the best monument. It's not listed within the churchyard. And a memorial inspection expert, their advice is being sought. And like to choose this shows both how local interest and dogged persistence in the face of lack of information, difficulties always come from trying to find out who's responsible for what when those responsibilities have been divvied up many which ways, can nonetheless yield results, although as you see before you there's still quite a way to go before we have a sort of sustainable management plan for the churchyard that balances its history with its rather wonderful natural environment. And Hackney Society's own Building Risk Group, we've highlighted what's been happening to the Heritage Risk offices at Historic England, so it's now tied in with consideration to the Heritage at Risk Register, and so everyone's kind of now more or less on the same page, and so everyone can kind of knows who's doing what, and people aren't kind of in their silos. People sort of now all pushing in the same direction. Okay, we are going to walk out the gateway. Stoke Newington Municipal Buildings, the former Town Hall, Assembly Hall and more, designed by John Reginald Truelove for the Metropolitan Borough of Stoke Newington, built and opened between 1935 and 37. It's built on the site of Newington Manor House of the 16th century, and later a terrace of houses called Church Row, erected in the period at the very end of the 17th and start of the 18th centuries. The basement housed the Civil Defence Control Centre, and the interior exterior is notable for its wartime camouflage, you can see particularly well here. I'm not going to say any more about that. We could have Tony Rich in our number, who is the foremost expert on Stoke Newington in the Second World War and has studied, amongst many other things, the wartime history of this building. It was only lightly damaged by wartime enemy action, and I think it's a slightly tongue-in-cheek thing I found on online, saying it was the camouflage paintwork that was applied to the walls that meant that the bombers and so forth couldn't see it. Which I think, well, what about the roof? But anyway,
They did the roof.
they did the roof. There we go. It's listed Grade 2 in 1995. It was added to the Heritage Risk Register in 2024, so the latest edition, as currently is, of the Heritage Risk Register features this building for the very first time. Why is that? It was partially renovated in 2010 to designs by Hawkins Brown Architects and at a cost of £6.4 million. Yet one of the results of all that work is failing roofs and rainwater systems, causing damage to the internal fabric, which has then forced Hackney's Hand to close the building to the public, and it lies almost entirely unused at the present moment in time. These issues emerged before 2017 because Hackney in that year outlined the need to spend a further £10 million to protect and maintain the building. Hackney Citizen already reported in October 2016 that Hackney had spent a total of £8 million on the building since 2009. So do the maths, that's £1.6 million on non-renovation associated costs. So it cost Hackney quite a lot then, and it still costs Hackney quite a lot now. Asbestos in the roof, unsurprisingly for a building in the 1930s. So the council had to apply for listed building consent in 2021 for emergency works to support the ceiling in the assembly hall with scaffolding and remove asbestos from the site. Hackney's gone a bit quiet on what's happening with the building. It's one of the things Building Risk Group has been particularly keen to try and elucidate what the plan is, where things have got to with the renovation and reopening of the municipal buildings. We've done reasonably well on that front. We've established that Hackney remains committed to seeing the restoration of the building, its economic regeneration, and they want to do this through a partnership with an appropriately experienced developer operator. And these sort of good models for this down in Walworth, in Southwark, and also in Hornsey. The town halls there have been revitalised and reopened, sort of largely private but mixed in with public uses. There was a 2017 planning design guidance document also covering the library, which we'll see in a minute, which more or less remains true, we're told. Mix of uses, but the idea to build residential blocks to the rear of the building have been ditched. So currently we're in a pre-project phase. Work is being done at roof level to install heat pumps, which will not only serve the whole network, but whole complex, but also be linked to the emergent Clissold heat network involving the swimming pool and more places besides. That's keyed into a bigger phased regeneration project which is currently being formulated. That will require approval by the elected members of Hackney Council, as will a programme of capital investment for urgent repairs. I imagine there's a lot of urgent repairs now needed on the roof and so forth, all of which will cost a huge amount of money, probably more than the £10 million that was forecast back in 2017. Another instance where we need people to kind of be raising their voices, just asking questions of the council, just showing that you care, just try and help speed along the whole project, demonstrate community buy-in, and I think also to influence what new uses, community, public uses there'll be within the regenerated building. How will it serve its community beyond just not being such a drain on council taxpayer finances? So yeah, it's very much a work in progress, and these things, because it's such a big building as well, it takes a lot of time for anything to happen. But yeah, the more people are aware that things are inching forwards and know that there will be consultations, there's already information out there. Just because it looks quite dishevelled now doesn't mean that it's nothing is happening. There is stuff happening. And yeah, it's just it's going to be a long slow road to get there. We're listed by Hackney Society in their Buildings at Risk book as being at risk in the 1980s. Okay, they've all now come through that in various states. Draw your attention particularly to Ryan's Bar, number 181. It's group listed with 179 and 177. And these are all 18th century buildings. 179, 181 were a matching pair. Obviously, you can see they're a little different nowadays. Ryan's changed from Coast Tacos in 2007. In 2025, in January of this year, a pair of applications for a rooftop extension to create a flat on the very top of the building was refused by reason of its unjustified loss of historic fabric and subsequent bulk, massing, scale, detail, design, position and location would result in incongruous and incompatible form of development, would have a detrimental impact upon the character and appearance of the pair of Grade 2 listed buildings. And that's not to mention the substandard size of accommodation, lack of dual aspect, non-affordable nature, and all sorts of other things. It was a stinker of a proposal, and the officers at Hackney Borough Council made very clear their dissatisfaction at this, and so the application refused. And whilst I might not have painted Hackney in the best lights up until now, I do really want to emphasise that Hackney's planners, as do all local planning departments, in this case particularly the urban design and conservation team at Hackney, they do good things. They do care for the borough's built environments, in this case the historic built environment, and it's through their input that we number 181 managed to avoid getting a really horrible rooftop extension, because no one else made a comment on that. We'll come to who else might want to make comments on such applications in a little bit. 179, Hackerson restaurant. This is a really sad story. It was used most recently as a mix of commercial use and housing multiple occupancy, unoccupied for a number of years, has fallen into a state of disrepair. And in 2020 it was entered on the Heritage and Risk Register for the first time, owing to both structural and asbestos issues. And there is extensive propping in place internally, and it needs major structural works happening. Planning consent was actually granted for various changes, including new windows and removal of the render finish in 2018, but that was not done, and so after 5 years that planning consent lapsed, and there are currently fresh planning applications in for very similar works, plus a rear extension to the building, which await determination. I think are really kind of being mulled over long and hard by the council, because it's been going on longer than most applications. There was also applications to build 2 semi-detached houses in the rear garden of 179. They were withdrawn on 19th of June on having attracted strong objections. The residents of Hawksley Road, which is behind and the street behind, which was reported in the Hackney Gazette last month. It quotes one resident, Ira Smith, who highlighted the site was part of the Clissold Park conservation area and not the right place to build houses on gardens. There needs to be a balance between green space and property. That's what gives Stoke Newington its fabric, he said. And indeed, he was very right on this point. 2004 conservation area appraisal, which is the document that kind of undergirds why conservation areas are designated, states that rear gardens need to be protected. That's a principle of the conservation area. So absolutely spoke up in the right way, and that probably harmful proposal has been.
The entrance to them have been from Hawksley Road, where
No, so these were all fronting on. All these they had.
No, I mean, if they built 2 in the garden, how would you get into
come out this way? There's no rear access. It was an interesting.
Who owns these buildings, like Lions and the Chinese?
So they all seem to be in various private ownerships. There's not one person owns the whole road. It's kind of been divvied up over the years, and so it's a big enough headache for one person to do, like one property, let alone kind of be facing.
Hackney Road is owned by offshore hedge fund companies.
Actually, we're finding that these people want to they own it, want to sort of be. I think this was sort of bespoke developer who do that kind of small heritage geared projects. 175, which handily the buses are just blocking the view of. You'll notice that's heavily cropped. This was added to the Heritage Register in 2019. It's the same year as planning consent was sought, and the following year was granted for its repair, including a new shop front, repairs to windows on the front and the rear, and erection of a mansard roof and a rear extension as well. COVID happened, nothing happened. New application is expected next year. We've taken a particular interest in this because it's very visibly at risk of collapsing. You'll notice the very big structural prop issuing forth from the. That's only just been erected. It's outside. It doesn't need planning consent because it's better to have that building still standing in some form with a slightly incongruous thing than not. So. Yeah, very much a live case, very much seems like there's things going on. And let's now cross over in 69, built in 1714, they're grade 2 listed. In 1972, a photograph that's on the rather brilliant London Picture Archive website shows it with a shop on the front of it, which wasn't there in 1930, incidentally, but was subsequently removed. It was in a pretty poor state in 1979, and
coming through.
was was identified currently at risk by Hackney Society circa 1987. It's interesting because, and you might have to sort of take time to look at this. There's a little plinth here with a stone on top of it. That plinth records that the building, certainly the cellar, was under restoration in 1982. So my deduction is that the work was ongoing still in 87, which is very slow work. But they got there in the end. Doesn't it look beautiful now? Also, just to add, it says it's from the medieval manor house. That's not a medieval piece of stonework. That's very classical, so it's sort of 16th century onwards. So it's a little addendum that. It's the end of this row. It's all kind of united by, they show how at-risk status is kind of episodic. It requires good, careful ownership, ownership with deep pockets as well, to ensure historic houses remain in good condition. And so the poor maintenance is what causes these things to slip into states of decay. It's not the intrinsic failings of old buildings. If you look after an old building, they tend to be all right, but that wall there bowing out so badly is probably a kind of slight exception to the rule, but generally speaking, take care of an old building and it won't become at risk. Right, if you extend in 1904 and then again in 1922 to 23 by A.G. Porry, who had a hand in the rather wonderful Art Deco Carrera cigarette factory in Camden, you know that building, who added the Memorial Hall. Which has, we're going to see a couple of really gut puncher inscriptions. The one over the doorway of the Memorial Hall, which might be around the side actually, says, "All ye who pass in quest of happy hours, behold the price at which these hours were bought." It gets me every time. It was listed in 2003 as an early and good example of a borough library, which contains. This is the squeeziest bit of this whole walk, so an early example of a borough library which contains exceptional war memorial hall. It was under-maintained, under-invested in for decades. In recent years, Hackney has acted in exemplary fashion in regards to this building. It approved £4.5 million worth of funding to regenerate it in 1930, including the bit that joins it to the municipal buildings, the former reference library. It's going to a 5-year programme of works. The need for this work was really emphasised in January 2023 when a piece of masonry fell off the building into the street. And so we're looking at a 2026 reopening date for it. And you may recall that in April of this year some scaffolding fell into the street, hit a van. The man driving the van was unscathed, and so was the library building. It wasn't brickwork, stonework wasn't damaged. Okay, is Spence Bakery, 161 Church Street. And you can see it's a rather innocuous 20th century development brought about by the collapse of the cellar of a Victorian building that once stood on the site. And it's kind of essentially a matching pair of 163. It was replaced with a 4-storey block of flats built far back from the Church Street frontage. So not entirely sure why. I don't think there was a plan to widen the road. I assume that was just for parking and maybe to give people, residents, a little more peace and quiet than might otherwise be from having roadside flats. The shop wasn't added until 1975. The conservation area appraisal document highlights this as a poor quality post-war development, and I mean, in the context of the conservation area, it very much is. And so it's sort of regrettable that the cellar collapsed in the 1960s and rather than 1980s when this was a conservation area, because I think we'd see a very different building before us if that had been the case, because I think the design guidelines would be such that it would try and emulate what was here, and not really carbon copy, but at least the kind of building that very much more responds to its context. But no shade thrown at Spence, and they made a lovely job of the building, and in itself it's a really nice rear staircase to the flats. But yeah, we're talking about Church Street, so here's 148 to 152 Stoke Newington Church Street. Why pointing out this one, Rob? This is a really interesting story behind it. It was part of Victorian terrace, 150 to 154, and a really cute little single-storey contemporary building, 148. Said to make a positive contribution to the Stoke Newington conservation area. It was owned by Hackney Borough Council, and row of shops on the ground floor. They all closed by 2011, and in 2013 Hackney submitted a planning application for the rearrangement of the shop fronts and rear extensions and side extensions to the buildings to facilitate the use of the upper floor as ground flats, as 3 flats. Consent was granted, work began in 2014, and the buildings were found to be structurally unstable. What happened then was they had to be completely demolished, and Hackney rebuilt on their site a new 3-storey building incorporating retail units and 3 self-contained flats over the course of the following year, 2015 on. And this is what you see before you. They are roughly in the style of the Victorian building. That is kind of gives you a sense of what was there, other than the fact that they built out over what had been the single story number 148. They needed retrospective planning permission for this. They applied in 2017, obtained it in 2018, had to do so directly from the planning committee, as they were the applicants as well as the deciding voice. A neighbour objected, highlighting how the shop fronts weren't equal to what was there before and would not enhance the conservation area. We'll come back to that in a second. And also from the Stoke Newington Conservation Area Advisory Committee, who disliked the height and the design of the fascia. What they didn't do was say that the building didn't look like the one that was there before. Clearly they thought better than to press that point. The argument had already been lost. It's controversial because once complete, the shops have remained unoccupied for a very long time afterwards, and the shop fronts came for criticism. An architect named Jonathan Law told the Hackney Gazette in January 2018, "It looks like they've been made up with doors from a skip. How they've ended up with this strange rebuild is beyond me. It's taking the piss out of the original." It's probably my favourite quote I'm going to give you today. And fair play to him. Those pictures online, they do look absolutely awful. Hackney had let the original consent for those shop fronts timeouts, had to reapply for permission in December 2018 using a more harmonious design. I think they'd heard Jonathan's words and others, and so what we see before us is the much improved design to those, and from 2021 onwards these shops have been reoccupied. 148, you might just be able to make out some brickwork through the doorway there. Those are the entrances to the flats, and that is the archway that's 2 archways, a tiny little one above it, that originally was located above the entrance to number 148. So they kept some of the fabric, kind of made it perpendicular to the street, and so there's a sort of little glimpse of the previous building there. So all told, it's Hackney Council doing things for the right reason, but in the wrong way, and so rightly copying flack for what they were trying to do. So Right, 133 Stoke Newington Church Street. We lost 133 before 1970. 131 lasted another 10 years or so. It probably demolished no later than 1980, otherwise it would have featured in the Buildings at Risk book that I've been waving around at you previously. In the 1930s, both buildings were home to the Paris Cycle Company, run by Henry Wrench. There's been attempts to redevelop the site. It was given permission in September 2020. 2000 rather, let that planning consent lapse. 2006 they reapplied again to a design that looked nothing like the buildings that were there before, and it was refused because they were trying to squeeze people into substandard sized rooms. Still see a little tiny snippet, little kind of nib wall there from 131, original kind of late 18th, early 19th century fabric. But I want to draw your attention to that graffiti there. That is a Banksy. This was done in 2001 by the mysterious artist. Some have called it Balcony Family. In 2009, the property owner applied for advertising consent to retain the graffiti and to possibly restore it. Why was that? Because in September 2009, Hackney subcontractors had painted over a large part of it with black paint. There's good quotes here as well. The building's owner, who owns this site and also 129, Sophie Atchfield, told the Hackney Gazette newspaper, "I looked out the window and saw what they were doing, so I ran downstairs and I told them to stop." And a blogger named Chris posted around the same time of their attempted intervention. This is the council workman speaking. "We knew it was a Banksy, love. It's a Stoke Newington landmark. We know that," we told them, but they wouldn't listen. And Mr. Alan Lang, then Hackney Cabinet Minister member for Neighbourhoods, said the council removed all graffiti regardless of artistic value. Hackney Council does not make a judgment call on whether graffiti is art or not. Our task is to keep Hackney streets clean. We made 4 attempts to contact the owners of the property. They may have made 4 attempts, but they're using land registry information, and the land registry had the wrong contact details of the property owner. So the application was put in 2009. No objections were raised by the Conservation Area Advisory Committee, and another supportive letter was also received. And Hackney Council's planning officer, who wrote the report on the application recommending approval, they played a very straight bat in this, which is kind of ironic. The advertisement is of a size, design and position which respects the character and appearance of the subject property, preserves the character and appearance of the conservation area, and does not have a detrimental impact on amenity. And consent was therefore granted for a period of 5 years. So I don't quite know what's happened next. Is it art? Is it current heritage though? Is more the question. Is it future heritage? I think it is. Whatever you think of it, currently, much like how the site of number 131 Street, sort of in a collection of 18th century, maybe early 19th century, case 109. We're in sort of a middle ground, and I think this is only going to be more and more appreciated. So hopefully, 111 can be restored in time. If it will be as part of a new development. An early 18th century house. We'll see it enclosed in the staircase. Added, grade 2 listed. Housing. It's a great shop. 1942 photo online. That London Picture Archive I mentioned earlier. It's an interesting. I've passed this so many times, not knowing anything about it, and then sort of read about it. Blackout precautions. I think it's great. All the stories we've heard so far, it's the same kind of reflex of no, that's what's going to make Stokey a bit better. Let's raise our voices up about it.
As long as a lot of 20th century into 21st, it's been a grocers. 1987, the buildings were at risk in Hackney Side.
Spa was in the supermarket, was in the ground floor. There's photos in the book I can show you of one of the interiors of the, I think it was 109, so that one on the right, which had beautiful 18th century panelling and all still there. In 2017, planning application was put forward
to convert the upper stories to some kind of residential use. They've been used in the 80s as just sort of storage and office, back office for the shop, and this is the first time it's going to be converted into something more meaningful. Obviously, with one eye on house prices, a place like this. The applicant's report included a statement that is significant neglect. A number of features still exist, but most have been damaged or irreparably deteriorated by weathering and decay, including the sash windows throughout both sides of the building. And 2017 application was soon withdrawn without being determined, and nothing has been proposed to. No works have been proposed to the building since, and so you can actually very visibly see that the windows are in pretty dire state, and I'm sure whatever is going on inside is still in an equally parlous condition. So another one I think is probably on the authorities' radar. Certainly I think it should be on the Building Risk Group register, Building Risk Group radar. A fun fact to end with: all these are nationally listed, so all of them on the National Register of England. The Fount repaired sign, Fount Pens repaired sign, is separately, it's locally listed, which is very unusual. But because it's added to the building, it's not in the National Heritage List for England listing description. So Hackney took the view that it could potentially be at threat of removal, repainting. So it's been added to the local list in 2012, I think it was. It's a nice indication of like what's called the elasticity of local heritage listing. You can kind of be a bit more flexible. You don't have to hit such high bars. And the Dalston Peace mural is also locally listed, so kind of akin to that in some ways. Okay, we're going to a mid-18th century house, which I'm sure, as you've already clocked, has steps leading up to a Pro-style Doric porch with triglyphs, guttae and mutal cornice. Grade 2 listed in 1974. In 1975, the photo shows it having Recorder House emblazoned on it. Brilliant, we've got a confirmation of that. Just wanted to mention this because talk a tiny bit about planning enforcement. So they're kind of the tough guys of the planning world. Handled in Hackney as elsewhere by a dedicated team. So when planning permissions have been digressed from, things aren't going as they should according to planning consent, enforcement comes in. So there's two cases I found related to number 91 in 2004 regarding works to the front elevation, and another in 2013 regarding unauthorised removal of an internal ground floor wall. Statutory listing, such as applies to this, applies to the internal fabric as well as just the outside. The description might only mention the exterior, but always pertains to the interior. So the whole building is what is listed. And there was an application in 2013 for external alterations, including new sash windows on the front elevation. It's around about this time, in fact, in 2013, it appeared on the Heritage Risk Register when it was stated to be at least partially occupied, but building is falling into disrepair. And it was removed in 2016. The planner clearly been arrested, looking pretty fine fettle today, and I would suggest that that is at least part because of the outcome of the enforcement actions, as well as the 2013 planning application that was put in and approved. Little fun fact for you: these railings have been hanging on to are separately listed. They're 18th century and have their own listing. We go behind me here. It is Grade 2 star listed with number 87 up the street. Early to mid 18th century pair. An extra story added in the 19th century. 85 has a door of 5 fielded panels, handsome door cases and eared architraves. I could go on. It also lengthened first floor windows with early 19th century cast iron balconies. Now this building gets discussed at great length in my favourite book and soon to be yours, which I think is also downloadable for free on the Hackney Society website. So if you want to pay for a copy, it's great to hold in your hands, but also it's freely available in PDF format. Author of this book gives Hackney Council both barrels on overnight number 85. It was bought by Hackney in the 1950s in order to demolish it because they had their refuse depot behind and they wanted to make more space for that. So obviously this house just being at the entranceway, because I mean all the dust carts had to come through this gateway, obvious course of action. They didn't do it, as you can see, but they didn't do much else with the building, and so in the 1970s it was vacant, and as the book states, its present decline is wholly attributable to council neglect. Does not mince its words. Fast forward to the 80s, the mid-80s, and the roof and most of the top floor collapsed and was afflicted with dry rot. The rear of the building was weakened with extensive water damage, and because this was a shared roof structure, the adjoining properties were also being threatened. There was still some internal original features. The fireplace was nicked from it, and the door case that we see, part of that had been nicked and the rest had been placed into storage. So it was completely bare in the 1980s. Hackney sold the building apparently not long before 1987, because by the time this book was published and photos were taken for it, there's already scaffolding up at the rear. Work seems to be underway. So it was sold with a covenant that it should be in single family ownership, a single house, rather than divvied up into lots of flats. And clearly the vision for it has come good. The doorway has been restored. The house is fine condition, never been on the Heritage Risk Register. So once it was removed from Hackney possession, private ownership would see the necessary funds to pay for its restoration. So the house has been rejuvenated.
One of the other houses, I don't know which one it is, was in Homes and Gardens recently. And it
That
was
one
on the
for
market
sale, wasn't
for
it? 4 or 5 million or something.
Oh my God.
It was.
Me, you see 18th century walls, gates and gate piers to the original Abney house, built right at the end of the 17th century, and was, as the plaque on the over on the corner of the wall says, was home for a time to Isaac Watts, the nonconformist pastor and hymn writer. Name Abney House actually didn't really come through till about 1840. It's known by various names, the Manor House and so forth. Talking about the gateway though, the original gates, it's thought were probably lost during the Second World War and restored about 1982 to the original design. It says restored to the original design. The gates were put back, but in kind of a very awkward late 20th century setting, and there were steps up to the entrance, very inaccessible for the prams, for the wheelchairs. And so, as part of the Abney Park restoration project, which we'll hear about a bit more about presently, changes were proposed, and this meant moving the gateway back and upwards to accommodate these two ramps, and opening up the ground behind to create what they call a landing area. Also, the gateway and the railings would be restored together for the first time in a long time, and the stone orb or finial on that pier there was replaced. There's dissatisfaction about this, expressed at both the pre-application stage and the application stage, but it's a very difficult site. You don't want to move all these graves, so it's an invidious task to try and find the best combination for it. The Conservation Area Advisory Committee put in their thoughts, the Historic England did, the Georgian group who look after 18th century matters, it was the National Amenity Society did, Hackney Society's planning group did, so a lot of input was put into it, and I think this is probably the best outcome. It's not ideal, it's certainly not in any way sort of the 18th century arrangement. I think compared to what was here before, I think good. It's not as incongruous as I think some had feared, so it's a good outcome for the cemetery and for Stoke Newington in general. So we're going to use one of the ramps here. Pick a ramp. So if you're interested at all in Stoke Newington's history, then probably you're interested in the history of Abney Park, so maybe don't need to go over this in like huge detail. Opened in 1840, ranked as one of London's magnificent 7 Victorian cemeteries. Also one of the finest garden cemeteries and the city's main non-conformist burial ground in that period, and planted as an arboretum as well by Lodges of Hackney, the famous 19th century nursery. I think 2,500 different species. Must have been an incredible site, and still you'll see exotic trees and shrubs and so forth dotted around and kind of evoking the plantation pattern of the 19th century. came from the grounds of Abney House, which is actually stood right just in front of you there, until it was demolished in 1843, and also Fleetwood House, which is over the wall there, demolished in 1872, and it's slightly redeveloped as Fleetwood Street. Cemetery retained some elements from the 17th and 18th century gardens, including some of the tree-lined walks and Watts's Mound, which is very far and we won't see it, which I like to think is sort of early preservation reflexes. There's conversations had about what do we keep, what do we remove. I like to think that there's sort of an element of kind of heritage preservation going on in that planning of the new cemetery. Skip forward to the 1930s, and there are press reports already coming forth of mismanagement and overcrowding of grave plots within Abney Park, and a desperate effort by the cemetery operating company to boost income. Less and less space for new graves became a thing. There was less revenue, staff began to be laid off. In the 1950s, further deterioration occurred as the overall owning company struggled to raise enough money for basic maintenance of the site, and in 1960 no longer had its own independent existence. And it was in this time that the mass infill burials became a feature of the cemetery, and we will see some as we walk down Watts Walk as part of our next little leg. So I'll pick up the story. I just wanted to kind of introduce it here, and these are some of the most famous memorials, a little clump of grade 2 listed things. This was basically a pile of rubble after the war, and remained so for several decades until the intervention of local people joining together. Shall we hear more? Brought Abney Park back from the brink. Just to point out the civilian war memorial there. It was restored, cleaned in 2020, the 80th anniversary of the attack on Coronation House, was it? Which killed so many people. The other side of Stoke Newington, and Coronation Avenue, you can see it there, paid for using money from a charity directed by the Abney Park Trust. So we'll talk more about them in present positions, but you can have a look at it in a second. We're talking about the restored monument to Joanna Vassar, who lived from 1795 to 1857. She was the daughter of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vassar, England's most important black abolitionist. His own grave location is unknown, and similarly relatively little is known about Joanna's life, other than she was married to a Congregationalist minister. So that job took him and Joanna across a large swathe of southern England, and ultimately to this part of the country. It's a fairly standard memorial for the time, and so it went unnoticed for a long time, at least its widest social historical significance, until it was rediscovered in effect by Vincent Carretta, who is the foremost historian of Olaudah Equiano, and this was in 2005. In 2006, restoration work was undertaken by Hackney. So it's apparently re-erection, so it must have toppled. And following that, it was Grade 2 listed in 2008. That in itself wasn't sufficient for it not to be on this Heritage at Risk register from as far back as I can trace. It's 2013, but probably on there since before that time. And it was the Abney Park Trust in 2016 paid for restoration works that allowed it to be removed from the register in 2017, and ever since its effective rediscovery in 2005, it's been much visited by those interested in the history of the abolition of enslavement in this country and beyond, of course. So it's a very significant memorial. The inscription on it is really badly weathered, but we've got a great little information board that's been put up here as well. So if you want to have a look at that. We'll pick up the story of the cemetery. It's 1972, it's February of that year, and the operating company abandoned Abney Park Cemetery altogether in that month. brilliant, and actually I will wave this around because if you can get your hands on a copy, it's well worth reading. Kind of official guide to Abney Park Cemetery of Paul Joyce, written in 1994, but such a good, timeless read. Mentions that despite being closed to new burials at that time, unauthorised burials continued to take place for 4 more years, with pathetic consequences for the bereaved, which is really as if like everything else that was going on wasn't bad enough to kind of have the sort of personal tragedies of unauthorised burial. I think really, really maudlin. Following the closure, the abandonment of the cemetery, widespread vandalism occurred to the monuments, also merciless attacks, in Joyce's words, on the chapel and the nearby catacombs. This is the former entrance to the catacombs, so below this is a huge subterranean structure. And there were rumours of black magic and equally unsavoury practices using the illegally exhumed remains. In 1974, an S.G. Ansell wrote a letter to the Hackney Gazette urging every person who has an interest in the future condition and access to their family graves to unite and form a committee at once. Without people's support, Abney Park Cemetery will be written off in the future. And it's kind of symptomatic of a groundswell of public sentiment that led to the formation of an association named Save Abney Park Cemetery, August 1974. And they then worked with Hackney Borough Council in persuading the council to take on the site, and Hackney Council did so in early January 1979 when they purchased it for £1. Save Abney Park Cemetery evolved into the Friends of Abney Park Cemetery, from which was formed the Abney Park Cemetery Trust. And many of those who first got involved in the 1970s were still involved 20 years later, and I've seen Councillor Tommy Shepherd also being celebrated for his notable support in getting the trust off the ground. Save Abney Park Cemetery in 1986 embarked on its restoration of monuments programme, leading over to 125 monuments to be reconstructed, repaired and cleaned. Obviously in a cemetery this size, it's an absolute drop in the ocean, but nonetheless many of the kind of key monuments that you see on these main pathways have been restored thanks to their efforts. 1992, Abney Park Cemetery Trust was configured and took on the management of the cemetery as an historic landscape and managed wilderness on a 21-year lease from the Borough Council. It gained local nature reserve status in 1993. In 1998, it was included on the very first Historic Heritage at Risk Register. There it remained for a long time afterwards. In 2009, already plans were afoot to put in for Heritage Lottery funding for a package of restoration works, primarily on the cemetery buildings and walls surrounding, but also pathways and monuments and so forth. And to do this, a 15-year lease extension was proposed. Remember, 21-year lease. 2013, when that lease was up, Hackney refused to renew the trust lease, and there was kerfuffle in the local press around that. Management was duly passed taken in-house by Hackney in 2015. This really was like the foundation for the Heritage Lottery Fund and National Lottery Community Fund bid that resulted in 2019 in securing £4.4 million for a suite of improvements to the cemetery to be done. They received initial 315k in 2017, and I used to volunteer as a conservation volunteer here in our Christmas drinks in the Coach and Horses. I remember the then cemetery manager coming in like, "We've got the money," and everyone's like, "Way!" And my friend at the time was like, did like doof doof. And he's like, "What?" You're always like, "It's a doof doof moment, isn't it? It's like EastEnders. It's like a big cliffhanger." So absolutely just sort of everyone just stopped in that moment. Anyway, yeah, lots and lots of good work has been done to the cemetery thanks to the Abney Park Restoration Project, the Abney Park Trust, Hackney Borough Council and supporting organisations including Hackney Society, and because of that, last year the cemetery was removed at long last from the Heritage Risk Register. Just as a little sidebar, Abney Park Trust's £22,000 annual grant from the Borough Council ended at the end of this past financial year. There's a 6-month exit grant, half the money provided. Its longer term financial future, at least earlier in the year, was unresolved, and I think, you know, all the good work that the Trust has done over so many years in its various forms, nonetheless, if you don't kind of have the finances to support such things, then you know, a track record of good work in itself isn't enough to kind of maintain the existence of such an organisation. So fingers crossed, the situation is better than what I've been able to find out online. Again, if you are interested in getting involved, then reach out to the Abney Park Trust. I'm sure they'd be delighted to hear from you. Right, we're going to turn around. Quite possibly the world's first non-denominational cemetery chapel. It was designed by the first Professor of Architecture at King's College London, Mr. William Hosking, in 1939 to 40. He also handled the layout of the cemetery and of the design of the main entrance gates, which we'll see at the end of the walk. He planned the chapel to reflect a lack of bias towards any one particular Christian denomination. The cruciform plan is in the form of a Greek cross with equal arms, showing the concept of equality before God. It's also a mishmash of styles. You've got kind of classical, Gothic, and again, kind of no preference is shown. It's also on a north-south axis. Most churches are oriented east-west. It's a funerary chapel for anyone, very much not a consecrated place of Christian worship. So it's, yeah, very much sort of struck out as a model for others to follow. 1960s already starting to show severe disrepair, and in the decades that followed, it became ruthless. Not ruthless. There's ruthlessness shown to its fabric, which was fire damage, stripped to its fittings, and structurally unsound. Hackney did do some emergency repairs in the 1980s, put on a new roof. People continued to pinch slates from it, and did work to stabilise the foundations and the structure in 1987, 1988. At the time of buildings at risk in Hackney, the plan was said to be to convert it for use as an interpretive education centre, whatever that exactly means. Certainly Hackney Society was supportive, many of the local people also were supportive, but it didn't come to pass. And so from 1998 it was on the Heritage at Risk Register, and often cited as one of London's most at-risk designated heritage assets. This certainly kind of guided, maybe enforced Hackney's hand as to what it did next. A condition survey was done in 2012, an option study on potential future uses of this building was done in 2013. March 2016, Hackney accepted a Heritage at Risk grant from Historic England, amounting to 50% of the cost of repairing the chapel, on the proviso matching the funding. Because, and this is a quote from the Cabinet report, to do nothing was not an option given the serious threat to the chapel that the chapel poses to public safety, and the fact that without urgent intervention the chapel could collapse and be irretrievably lost. And so this led to the restoration and repair of the structure and reopening in 2017. We visited that time, we noticed a very bare state, no windows in, really rough rubble floor. It was watertight, but at least it was moving in the right direction. Not sufficient to get it off the Heritage at Risk Register. This is what came next with the Abney Park Restoration Project. Plans are drawn up to fit it out as an events venue. Some exterior alterations proposed. You'll maybe see a Corten steel cube poking around the corner there. There's one on the other side in the angle of the chancel and transepts. There was some limited opposition to this from people who wrote into about the planning applications. Some saw the addition of those structures as having a negative visual and immediate impact on the chapel, and others spoke of the diminution of its historical significance as a chapel of rest, and also how having events being held here could impact and have a privatisation, sort of commercialise the cemetery in general. And when Hackney put in for the licensing for this events venue, it also received objections from local residents and cemetery users. Although I should add that this wasn't because the historic buildings are at risk, but more because of the status of some local nature reserve. People worried about the impact it would have on loud music and loud voices have on the wildlife and its contentment. Although there's also specific provision made that people weren't to go anywhere near the war memorial, so it's, at least there was some kind of heritage consideration made on that. Okay, come on the final stretch. Swan, who was the inventor of the screw propeller, which was subsequently adopted by the Royal Navy, and he later invented something called the self-acting chain messenger, which was also taken up by the Royal Navy in 1831. He was an incredibly modest chap because he never patented the designs he made, even though they were clearly successful, and appears to have been very happy for others to reap the rewards of his ingenuity. So, I mean, fair play to him. At least I'm talking about him now, so he's kind of got his roses in the end. So yeah, you see it's another very similar touch to Joanna Vassar's memorial, kind of the same period, the same design. It was really overgrown with ivy in 1997 when it was inspected and duly accepted for Grade 2 listing. Quite when it came onto the Heritage Risk Register, I don't know. It was at least as far back as 2013, probably before that. Abney Park Trust was able to find the funds after following the agreement of a schedule of repairs with Historic England done in 2016. That clearly led to the repairs done so rapidly that by 2017 it was removed from the Heritage Risk Register. So one memorial amongst many, and it's kind of one of the interesting things about Abney Park. The architectural distinction of many of the memorials isn't recognised in heritage protection, heritage designation. So kind of the social history of the individual stories is what's really garnered them Grade 2 listing or higher. It'd be an invidious project to take on to kind of really try and list all of them. It is a conservation area, of course, so it does have statutory protection, but within that, it still in itself doesn't guarantee preservation to the optimal degree. Post Howard Carter 20th century confections in Art Deco style. They're not. I already mentioned that from 1840, designed by Hosking of the chapel and so forth. He did them in conjunction with noted Egyptologist Joseph Bonomi. And if you look over to the North Lodge there, you might be able to just discern an inscription above the doorway. That is in Egyptian hieroglyphs, appropriate enough, and it actually has an English translation, thanks to Bonomi, and the wording translates as "the gates of the abode of the mortal part of man," which I think is not only apt, but again, another sort of big, chunky Stoke Newington like thinker of a phrase. What do you know? By the 1970s, things aren't looking so good for this gateway and the lodges on either side. They're all kind of listed as one with the gates and with the ironwork railing outside. They derelict and fire damaged. The forecourt, facing onto the high street, had been turned into a car park to make a little bit of money. Grade 2 listed in 1975. In the early 1980s, the lodges were restored, as was the gateway, and one of the side gates was returned from storage and rehung at that time. The South Lodge further work was done on it, fitted out as a visitor centre in 1992 to designs by Brady Malalieu architects, to acclaim in the architectural press. Next, the attention returned to this area outside, and Abney Park Cemetery Trust obtained money from some source or other. There was talk of European community money. This was back in European community days, to pay for the restoration of this area. Make sure, rather than kind of the weird like 80s concrete flower beds, they had nice paving, granite sets and so forth. And also that money that they found paid for the recreated iron barrier rail you see outside. The original designs, it had been pinched, sold off, who knows. These lodges and the spaces to the other side of them are very key to the Abney Park regeneration project. The refurbishment of the North Lodge had very much a new community or learning building at its heart. Those who've known Stoke Newington for a while may remember a porter cabin there, functional, but my God, it was cold in the winter. So that was replaced, new building built in its stead. Work's done also on the South Lodge, now the Abney Park Trust office, and yeah, again, further work's done, just kind of zhuzh up the paving and pedestrian areas on either side of the gateway. Never to be a little bit of reaction to these proposals. One commenter said the cafe could detract from the charm of the existing buildings, and that the building footprint shouldn't be increased from what was there before, so as not to encroach on the cemetery. And this one I quite like. Look, this speaks to the pedant in me. Someone said that the proposed works to the gateway shouldn't be described as enhancements, when in fact they constitute repair and maintenance. It's like, good on you. It's impossible to please all people all the time. And I think what's resulted, the new buildings blend in well with the old. They serve their purpose. They brought back the gateway building, the historic buildings, to a really great state. They're plagued by graffiti. There are proposals that they need to have boards put up to stop people just tagging them constantly, but it seems that these are respected. Somehow everything seems to work really, really nicely. So I think, as with the south entrance, I've got no horse in this race, no skin in the game. I think what's resulted has been a real win for Stoke Newington and Hackney in general. Okay, so anyone who needs to peel off can do so. I'm not forcing you to. There's another mini additional leg to get to the axe. We'll pass a couple of buildings on the way. We'll stop for one. So I was going to do. Okay, just wait for. The big building there is now called the Fleetwood Apartments. It used to be Stoke Newington High Street School. Present building, probably early 20th century. Locally listed in 1991. Why it's important is that it's probably not just unique to Hackney, is that certainly at primary school level, number of pupil numbers are falling quite dramatically. There's overabundance of school buildings basically, and so schools have been closed year on year, and often those are housed in 19th or early 20th century buildings that are locally listed, in one case at Culverston Primary down on just off Ridley Road Market. It's a Grade 2 listed building. One of the issues the council has is try and find new uses for these buildings. There's talk of you have to apply to the Secretary of State to get permission to convert from something other than school use, and Hackney is in the early stage of formulating a plan to use some of them for emergency temporary accommodation. We have such an enormous housing waiting list, again not unique to Hackney, and so to be able to convert these quite vast buildings into at least sort of short to medium term residential accommodation for people on the housing waiting list, I think it's a really good idea. It's certainly something we're probably going to be looking at more with the Buildings at Risk group. As the end of this school year, 4 more schools have been closed. So yeah, it's an ongoing issue. It seems to be quite sort of a build-up of buildings for which nothing is currently happening, and something needs to happen. So yeah, it's certainly an issue that has obviously wider social implications, but also built heritage implications. So it's quite an interesting thing that I just wanted to highlight to you. Our theatre, as is now, has a brilliantly rich and complex history, going back to the early 19th century, when the land on which it sits was gifted to the Society of Methodists in 1817. The present building is a Methodist chapel, but it was built as a chapel and school by the Primitive Methodists in 1875. In the Second World War, it was badly damaged, and it was described as being partially disused in 1953, shortly before it was bought by the Jewish congregation. And I really apologise for my Hebrew pronunciation here. The Beth Hamadresh Ohel Gitzel. The Board of Management of said congregation wrote in December 1953, which I should add is the Jewish year 5714, in an appeal document which is online, part of a brilliant website of local Jewish history. They wrote, "This building is most suitable for conversion into a synagogue. In addition, there is also accommodation for small social events of a communal nature, all of which is much is a much needed want in the district. So it's brilliant, like relatively early advocacy for reuse of historic building. They renovated the building after buying it, and it was consecrated as a Northwold Road Synagogue on the 18th of December 1955. The congregation had previously worshipped at 48 and then 46 Brook Road, so not too far away. They managed to recruit a sufficient congregation in the 1950s and celebrated their 50th anniversary before they closed in 1989. And I think they've now relocated to Tottenham, according to some Google indicated that's the case to me. 1991, the building was locally listed. 1992, the Sunstone Health and Leisure Club moved in after refitting it as a women-only gym. The basement was a swimming pool. They inserted a mezzanine level for running machines. It became known as Sunstone House, not unsurprisingly, and this operated until 2014. After that, the building was purchased by the Tower Theatre Company, London's only full-time non-professional, or Inner London's only full-time non-professional, so it's been a long walk, theatre company. Did so in 2017 thanks to a request from a long-standing member named Barbara Waddell. In 2017, in November, they got planning consent for its conversion into a theatre, 150-seat theatre, and associated spaces including a bar, with conditions that the original finishes should be matched and all architectural features left alone. Everyone loved the idea, and the conversion was actually undertaken pretty rapidly because the curtain went up in the first production, which is Henry V, out of interest, on the 26th of September 2018. Right, we're going to on the northwestern tip of the Northwold and Cazenove Conservation Area, designated in 2010. It's not really what brought us here, it just felt like an appropriate finishing point, once they've gone anyway. And just to kind of wrap up the tour, I know I've sort of bombarded you with all sorts of facts, and so I just thought try and tie it all together in your mind in a place that's, I thought it was going to be a little quieter. It was a lot quieter on Thursday afternoon when I came here. So yeah, thanks for all paying attention, and just say, you know, we've heard about 11,000 signature petitions, we've heard about one person letters of objection, not to mention people forming action groups and otherwise highlighting plights of particular heritage assets in print articles, online, however it might be. Now, there's multiple ways of in which people have acted to defend and continue to defend Stoke Newington's at-risk built heritage. Heritage assets come to be at risk, seldom do so overnight. You know, there are instances, the Firestone factory, being one famous one from I think the 80s, of overnight demolition or bank holiday weekend demolition. They're rare. I don't think we've seen any examples in Stoke Newington. But certainly one thing that's very much true of Stoke Newington as anywhere else, it's easier and quicker to see a historic building or space slip into a state of dereliction or decay than it is. It's quicker to do that than to see it restored to, you know, a good or an optimal state. And certainly a lot more effort is also required to right those wrongs. Now, particularly with the houses we've seen, in most cases we've been talking about private property, and as I mentioned, outside number 181, Stoke Newington Church Street, now we're talking about private property, relying on conscientious owners and owners with the financial means to maintain and restore and then maintain their properties. Fortunately, planning law has changed in recent decades, so the bad old days of the 1970s and 80s that buildings at risk in Hackney very much illustrated. You know, we're not in the same position now legally, so as you hopefully will have seen, well, we have historic buildings, listed buildings that are vacant, are derelict to all intents and purposes. You know, they're not so frequent as they were, say, 30, 40 years ago. Actually, yeah, number 91 Church Street, that's a really good example of how things can even get to the point of being on the heritage risk register in recent years. It just takes a bit of neglect to, you know, trigger the response from Hackney as a planning authority and then Historic England, and it quickly escalates to a point which is on the Heritage Risk Register. But then that opens up new options for acquiring funding, acquiring expert advice that can secure the future and the removal from that the register. Not we've seen too many of them, but 16 out of 31 of the listed buildings and structures in Hackney on the current Heritage Risk Register are Christian places of worship or structures otherwise associated with church buildings. No shock to hear that, as a rule, church congregations are declining, and so these buildings were built for congregations in the hundreds, maybe down the tens or smaller. The costs, as we know, in every aspect of life are rising all the time. So what needs to happen is other groups need to become involved in order to make more use of the building, bring in more income, generally have more people invested in the present and the future of these things. And so, it's one of the things, and we're going to go and look at another church further down the street, but you don't have to go far in London to find a listed church that is on the Heritage Risk Register and needs to have a sustainable future that probably involves appropriate secular uses as well as religious uses, in order to kind of, in effect, actually, quite blunt about it, in order to be able to attract the level of funding that's needed to restore the buildings to the extent that they're removed from the Heritage Risk Register. It's a hideously complex, hideously expensive thing to embark upon. Went to a training event a few months ago, and it needs specialist project management, and needs all sorts of specialist advice. It's multi-year, multi-million-pound projects tends to be. So, if you know of such a building, if you want to get involved, do so. The more people, whatever you can bring to the table, I encourage you to do so. But that's at the sort of maximum level of involvement. We've seen some publicly owned buildings and spaces that are at risk in the case of the municipal buildings, in the case of the old churchyard. And I think here it's where we can kind of, as citizens, sort of have particular positive impact, by liaising with our elected councillors, by writing to the planning authority, just by chatting to our neighbours. And chances are there's already like a group that exists who might be focused on doing something about the thing that's in poor condition. And so we've seen Abney Park just now, we've seen how Stoke Newington Library is currently under restoration. We may live in for the public sector, live in very straitened financial times, but things are still possible. And I think it's elective democracy. We have to kind of play our role, active role, just do something to make sure that people know this is important to us, and we want to see, as everyone tends to do, want to see a good outcome for assets like the municipal buildings, just sort of like the library. And ultimately, there's myriad possible reasons why you as a person might want to get involved in advocating for a particular heritage asset. And Stoke Newington is very much a typical place, as with anywhere else in London or beyond, where other people are likely to already be interested in achieving the same positive outcome for something that's slipped into decay. And hopefully I managed to impart on you all the examples of good groups, good individuals who've really stepped up to the plate and have raised their voices to say, this is what I want to happen, this is the good thing I want to see in the end, and collaborating with others to secure the future of the built heritage they care so much and so deeply about. So whether by starting from scratch or getting involved with an existing group, hopefully these models can be models can be used as templates and as inspiration to emulate by all, not putting any pressure on you, by anyone, I should say, in the present and in the future. So yeah, it's been a long tour. Sorry I garbled that last bit, but yeah, that's